All right, y'all ready for our keynote speaker? Well, I am. I've been looking at his website, and I'm so excited to have him here with us today. So Gary Karp is kind of amazed to be here. Neither disability nor emergency management were parts of his original plan. But in 1973, Gary became a wheelchair user at the age of 18. Publication of the first of his 4 books came in 1999, and he has been devoted ever since to communicating the authentic human nature of the disability experience. In 2016, Gary joined FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, as a disability integration advisor and has since deployed to 7 disasters for a total of 553 days. Now, to his considerable surprise, he's here to offer his insights into these 2 worlds that have so much to gain from each other. Please welcome Gary Karp.
Good morning, everybody. Is my microphone on? We just have to get this puppy working properly. How far forward can this go? Oh, beautiful. We've got cable length. Yep, that'll do it. Okay, so slides. Thank you. Thank you. They can see me. So let me tell you a little bit more about how I got into these 2 worlds so unexpectedly. Here I am in 1972, at the very pinnacle of hip 70s fashion, by the way. Some of you understand. This is June 1972, and this is the last photograph of me on my feet. I grew up in Southfield, Michigan, just outside of Detroit, and there was a huge storm that summer. And because it tore up the trees so badly, a neighbor hired some friends of mine and I to clear his property. It was covered in branches, and there was a tree out front that he wanted cut down because it was damaged. So 18-year-old boys being offered money, irresponsible adult. So I climbed up in the tree with a chainsaw. He didn't even bother to supervise, and then fell 20 feet and broke my back at T12, L1, and injured my spinal cord. From there, I went to the hospital, and I spent 6 weeks in this contraption called a circle bed. In the 70s, they hadn't developed bracing surgery yet, so you had to lay straight while the spine healed. And this circle bed, you can see the curve up there in the corner, is designed to alternate you from your back to your stomach, and we did this routine every 4 hours, day and night, for 6 weeks. So that I wouldn't get pressure sores, of course. See the terrible time I'm having with the lovely staff. This was really a rough experience for me. And there was such an outpouring of attention. All my family and friends and all these people were coming to visit me. So it wasn't as hellish as you might think, and I was never told that I wouldn't walk. So I was operating on the assumption that I was going to recover. So I kind of had a good time in the circle bed. More to the point, when they told me what the next 6 weeks was going to be, I was horrified. You can't get your head around something like that. But you know what? I adapted to it. I got into the rhythm of it. When 4 hours was up, it was a relief to have my position change. So I learned very early one of the most central insights of the disability experience, that what I project something is going to be like, what I project about my ability to deal with or adapt to something, turns out not to be what it really is. In other words, you don't know. The lesson is you have to move forward to find out and do the things that it takes to discover how something's really going to be. And I got that from the very, very beginning. So after 6 weeks in the circle bed, I went to Detroit rehab for 7 weeks. They made me very strong. They optimized my balance. They taught me wheelchair skills, which in the 70s was very useful because there were no curb cuts, so I needed this to be able to deal with curbs. They taught me about my body and how I needed to take care of it. They taught me how to transfer myself, and on and on and on. In other words, they prepared me. They trained me. And during that time, I learned that disability is very much about method. It was a complete mystery before, of course. Nobody knows. How do you know how to deal with disability until it's your experience? But just through that process and rehabilitation, I came out with a fair degree of confidence because I understood, okay, I know how this works. And in that 3-month period, I also kind of figured out that I was still me, for better or worse. And that as much as the disability felt like this, and seemed like that's all everybody saw, bless you, I understood pretty early that, okay, this is just me, this is how I'm going to function, this is how it works, let's get out there and get on with it. So here I am, a little after 3 months in the state-of-the-art Everest and Jennings lightweight wheelchair of the time. And then it was time to carry on. I had missed 1 term of college. I continued school. I graduated in architecture. I had a career in graphic design for 11 years. I was getting on with my life. I was chasing after women I was obsessed over. I was spending time with my friends. I was a musician since I was a child, so I was able to get back to performing. So I just carried on as a wheelchair user. Then in 1996, and I'm not going to go into the details of this, but suddenly I was offered a contract to write a book. I had always wanted to communicate the authentic, use that word in the introduction, that the authentic understanding of the disability experience. Because again, once I was in community right away, it was very, very clear that people didn't get how this worked. People didn't get how I was still just me in the context of now I wheel instead of walking. And I always wanted to straighten the world out. And here I had an opportunity to write a book that was really geared to wheelchair users in this case about here, this is how it works, to help people with their process of making the adjustment, of making the adaptation, of discovering what's possible, getting out there, getting on with their lives. Here's the second edition cover. This is what set me on the course of my role in the disability world as speaker, trainer, journalist, writer, communicator, bon vivant. That was an ad lib, and I'll never do it again. One of the things that happened in that time is I joined the board of the National Spinal Cord Injury Association. And that's when I came to know Marcy Roth. Marcy, we lost our video? There we go. Marcy was director of the National Spinal Cord Injury Association, and Marcy became the director of the Office of Disability Integration and Coordination for FEMA. And it was on her webpage that I saw the listing for the job for Disability Integration Advisor. Here I am in my FEMA garb. Yes, it's the real deal. I'm actually one of these people. Hold your applause. I love this work. I find the emergency management world really amazing and really fascinating. I am so proud to wear that logo, so proud to be a part of this community. The people that I work with are, for the most part, with very few exceptions, incredibly cool, incredibly wonderful people. And there's a culture when we're out there deployed of this shared feeling of we are out here to make a difference, to be of service to people in a really significant way. It's this shared sensation and emotion that we all have that's very, very, very tight. But by far, one of the best features of being deployed for long periods of time with FEMA is Marriott Titanium Elite. I've gotten more than 3 weeks worth of free hotel rooms out of this deal. In Arizona, we have a problem. We don't have enough disasters. And because of that, people don't think in terms of disasters. You live in North Carolina, you live in Florida, you live in California, you are aware that you are living someplace where major things can happen. Even there, it's tough to get people to commit proactively to planning and preparedness. Here in Arizona, it's a lot more difficult, but there is no shortage of possible events that can take place here in Arizona that are significant, that are life-threatening, that when they hit, you better believe people are going to want us to be ready to go to deal with these kinds of things. So this is part of our challenge here, is how we all commit together, how we all get the resources that we need to make the commitment that it takes to deal with these kinds of things. Because, ladies and gentlemen, these things are real. And those of us that have been out in the field, deployed, working with disasters, really know it firsthand. So let me show you some of my vacation slides, may I? This is the Florida Keys. The Florida Keys are a 125-mile long stretch of islands off the south tip of Florida. And for a significant part of that 125 miles, this is what you saw. Even bigger piles of debris, including on all the side streets. For months and months and months, every day, all these trucks out there picking this stuff up to carry it away. It's amazing what a mess it was. This is Baton Rouge, 45 inches of rain. Am I in a bad place? Is that why it's dropping it? And people's houses were flooded up to the ceiling in some case. You drive through neighborhoods, this is what you see. Everybody's possessions dumped out on the street to be picked up. This is the Outer Banks of North Carolina following Hurricane Matthew. Combination of wind and water infiltration. Once again, everything piled up out on the street edge. Trees don't just fall over because of wind. When there is significant rain and flooding, the ground gets so soft that the roots can't take hold anymore, and large trees just fall over because the root system just can't carry the weight of it anymore. This is Florida. This is in Puerto Rico. Lots and lots of paint torn off of buildings, not by the wind, but by all of the debris that the wind carries. So it's dangerous enough to be out in hurricane force wind, but it's especially dangerous because you are going to be pummeled and injured by anything that wind picks up. All right? Lots of evidence of that. Puerto Rico had some particularly difficult problems. This is a house up in the mountains in Puerto Rico that first they couldn't get a contractor to go out and give them an estimate. Then they couldn't get a contractor to really commit to doing the work because the contractor knew that if they left any materials out there, it was going to be vandalized. Some materials were being stolen from the sites because there was no neighbor close enough. There was no protection up there. And the house was vandalized itself. And meanwhile, the family living there are in hotels under FEMA's TSA, Transitional Sheltering Assistance Program. We're trying to get them out to some transitional housing. Do you get how unsolvable some of these situations are? Puerto Rico is very, very difficult. Also, Puerto Rico was not this green after the storm. Maria, they tell me, literally blew all the foliage away. It was brown, meaning that there was nothing for the cattle to feed on. So you drive around Puerto Rico and you see all these emaciated cows and horses, and there were lots and lots and lots of stray dogs all over Puerto Rico, and this is the one that I wanted to bring home. Oh, unfortunately I couldn't. And you know who makes out big? The signage industry. In hurricanes, it's a windfall, pardon the pun. Okay, which brings us to people with disabilities and other access and functional needs. This is a term I never came across until I was in the emergency management world. And how perfect, because not everybody identifies with disability. People who have recently acquired a disability, senior citizens, pregnant women, people who are recovering from recent surgery, they got their knees or their hips done, and on and on and on and on. There is a large contingent of our citizens who have functional needs who absolutely do not identify themselves as having a disability. So this is the umbrella term that brings everybody together, and I think that it's very important because it helps us so well to really think about the population that we're here to serve. And they have a number of unique needs. People who rely on ventilators, in particular, much less power wheelchair. Power loss is a big deal for them, life or death for some of them. Sheltering and accessibility is still a difficult problem. There's great information out there about it, about how to approach it, but we haven't really achieved it reliably yet. Am I in a bad spot again? The microphone's going in and out? Just tell me to move if you think it's... Okay. There are some people who cannot be hot. Senior citizens are very sensitive to it. People with multiple sclerosis, it flares up their symptoms. And people with quadriplegia don't sweat. They just cannot be in the heat. Okay, quick microphone switch. Hit it, baby.
It's on.
It's on. Is it on?
Yep.
Okay. Housing, wow. That's loud. Housing is already an extremely difficult problem for people with mobility disabilities. Any of us who live with this will tell you that the moment we're out there in the market looking for housing, we are at an extreme disadvantage that translates into emergency events where people need transitional housing. Very, very little to choose from. Durable medical equipment gets damaged or lost, wheelchairs, walkers, prosthetics, nebulizers, CPAP machines, all kinds of things that people require, urological supplies, ventilator kits with suctioning, and on and on and on. And people live in the community and work and are active and are fully participating by use of community-based personal assistance services. Those people may not be able to get to them, so suddenly that person is stuck because they don't have the services they need to function in the community, or maybe they need to get to a dialysis appointment. And as Becca so capably emphasized, and I will add to, effective communication. Let's go back to Marcy Roth. After 9/11, Marcy went to FEMA, director of the National Spinal Cord Injury Association, and she was thinking about people with disabilities in that event and in New York City, and she went to FEMA and she said, I would like to work with your people who deal with disabilities and disasters. And FEMA said, well, we don't have any people like that. And then Katrina hit, and Marcy got more involved, and she was getting phone calls from people about the needs that they had. In particular, Benilda Sachetta. There we go. Benilda was quadriplegic, used a power wheelchair. She lived in an apartment in New Orleans. She was left by first responders. They sort of didn't know how to deal with her. And she got Marcy on the phone, and she was calling constantly over a couple of day period, begging, please get somebody here to get me out. The flood waters were coming. Marcy was actually on the phone with Benilda when the line went dead. The next day they found her and her wheelchair floating in her apartment. Not the only wheelchair user to die in New Orleans, certainly not the only person with a disability to die in a disaster. This is life and death. This shit is real. Pardon my language, but that word expresses it very accurately. Serious stuff. So, after Katrina, anybody in the EM world can tell me what this is? Somebody? Ray, come on, you've got to be able to tell us what this is. You get a C minus. That's okay. You were trained 3.5 years ago. It's okay. The Post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act, PCEMRA. PCEMRA was the first legislation that required FEMA to have a disability coordinator. This was the beginning of DAFN being included in a serious way in emergency management, response, and recovery. They hired somebody else, but Marcy came in, I think it was a couple years after, and Marcy Roth became director of what became the Office of Disability Integration and Coordination. And she built it into a large team. We deploy in force to disasters. Ray, when we were in North Carolina, I don't know, 30 of us or something like that? 60? Yeah. So we're a very, very, very significant organization that Marcy built, and it took the death of Benilda and others to make the case at the legislative level that this is something that must happen. We've got to be doing this. And now disability integration is a significant part of FEMA, but it also has to be a significant part at every other level: city, state, local, tribal, county, all the rest. This is still early in this process, but it's what we have to be doing. And it's still a significant problem, because look at the news reporting. We're still seeing lots and lots of reporting showing us the scale of the impact on people with disabilities in disasters and the shortfalls. That shelters really are not accommodating people's needs consistently, that housing is a really difficult, persistent problem for people with disabilities, that in some cases there are attitudes that say, okay, well, we'll send somebody to a nursing facility or a hospital, even worse, which is a huge mistake, because hospitals have to be providing treatment. People with disabilities and disasters don't need treatment. They need accessible settings where they can function like they already do in the community. So that's a big, big mistake that unnecessarily taps resources that other people need. So it's a threat to other people to not properly shelter and have housing for people with disabilities in disasters. And of course, the biggie, people die. Some of you remember this image. This is from Houston following Irving, Ira, come on, what was it? Harvey. Jeez. I have too many disaster names in my head at this point. This is a nursing home that they didn't have a great plan in place. And I'm guessing that those folks really didn't care much about having the popcorn machine at that particular moment. Okay. So one of the things that I did, one of my favorite things that I did in this work, was I worked with disability community partners to help them connect to the recovery process, to help them understand the emergency management process, and help them understand FEMA. And in FEMA, my partners in doing that were the VALs. Anybody know what a VAL is? Yes?
I am one.
Is that
Voluntary agency liaison.
is that you, Wendy?
Whitney, yes.
Whitney. Damn, I get it wrong every time. Hi, Whitney. It's good to see you. Whitney Hesniak, everybody. Woo-hoo. A voluntary agency liaison with the state of Arizona. FEMA has a crew of voluntary agency liaisons, and their responsibility is to work with this very large world of organizations from Red Cross and United Way and the substantial faith-based disaster response world that's out there on a much larger scale than I ever understood. And it was amazing. Catholic Charities, the Lutherans, the Methodists, the Mennonites, these people have very substantial disaster assistance organizations in place, and they deploy in force. And so it was about working with the VALs and all those organizations. By the way, the Buddhists are also pretty serious about this. After 9/11, this organization, the Tzu Chi Foundation, started coming to the US, and since 9/11, they've distributed $27 million worth of $250 debit cards to disaster survivors. All of this was to connect people to the LTRGs. Come on, Ray, tell us what an LTRG is. Long-term recovery groups. Later in the recovery process, community groups form because disasters always start and end locally. So long-term recovery groups form in a formal fashion with bylaws, with boards, with fiduciary responsibilities in order to continue to address unmet needs of disaster survivors. And the connection with voluntary agencies is key to this, and having the disability community partners connected to this and a resource that's available to the LTRGs is also critical, and that's what I got to learn. That's what I got to work on a good deal of the time that I was out there deployed. So, what have I learned? Well, in all this interaction with the emergency management world, we also got to do disability awareness training and teaching, and with the disability community to try to connect them to this process, what I found is that these two worlds still have a lot to learn about each other. So that's what I figured that I would try to do today, since I have this blessing of being from both worlds now, is to sort of help you people understand each other even more deeply, even more better, in service of the work that you are ready to do. So let's start with the emergency management world. Here's the basic thing. The emergency management world prepares for, mitigates against, responds to, recover from disasters. That is the mission statement. Though FEMA has pared down the mission statement to make it much simpler, we help people before, during, and after disasters. But that's the gist of it. Planning, preparation, big parts of what emergency management is all about. We're trained in that from the get-go. All right? So, emergency managers, again, city, county, state, tribal, hospitals, corporations, universities, all these emergency management professionals spend their time developing plans, are required under law to develop plans, then they do training amongst themselves, they then do exercises to test out the plans, and then they get feedback and assessment, and then they put it back into the process, and it happens all over again. The disability and access functional needs community has so much to contribute to this process, absolutely needs to be a part of it. And understand that emergency managers, we're on call. We are ready to go at a moment's notice. In fact, there were declarations, federal declarations over the weekend in South Carolina, in Oklahoma, in Arkansas. My cell phone could ding at any moment, right now, and I'll be on a plane tomorrow and away for probably months at a time. Emergency managers locally show up at the Emergency Operations Center, ready to go 12 or more hours a day, 7 days a week. We've all done this. This is the nature of the scale of our commitment and our readiness. We do this work because we're ready to go when we're needed. But in Arizona, there are no dedicated DAFN staff. There are a number of people who have DAFN as part of their portfolio. Sometimes they have a hard time spending much time at it at all. But back to the problem of Arizona, we don't have so many disasters. So our state doesn't make an investment in the funding so that our emergency management organizations can have DAFN specialists on their staff. As compared to the state of California, Vance Taylor on the right is the DAFN coordinator for the entire state of California. And here he is with Linda Mastandria, who is the current director of FEMA's Office of Disability Integration and Coordination. So, I don't know, sure would be nice if we could get more people paid to work on this, even full-time. All right, so that's lesson one on emergency management. Let's take a look at the disability world now. Part Now, the EM world is kind of hidden. People have no idea of the scale of the emergency management culture and how much work is done, how much planning and preparation there is. It's this whole hidden world, and as I began to learn about it, I was really amazed. This is incredibly cool, the scale of the commitment to it. So there is misunderstanding about emergency management because people just don't even know they exist. Well, with disability, People know they exist, but they see them through a lot of inaccurate lenses. They just don't get who we are and what our lives are really about. Stereotypes are very, very, what word am I looking for? Sticky, let's say, right? We still tend to be viewed in medical terms, in terms of our limitations and our loss and what we're not able to do. We are thought of as people who need to be taken care of. We need to help the handicapped. We need to have programs to help the disabled. We need to have plans that will provide for people who have special needs as compared to just needs as human beings like everybody else does. It's kind of a separating kind of term. And to many in the government, and I saw this somewhat in FEMA, is that now it's the law is making us do stuff for people with disabilities, so it's an additional burden, it's more work, it's more cost, and that is obviously very negative view. And compliance, by the way, is not solution. I encountered this in FEMA a few times. But we're in compliance. No, but that doesn't mean that you're meeting this person's need. There's no way that the law or any guidelines are going to be able to cover every possible situation. That's why the concept of reasonable accommodation exists, because you have to be able to follow up when somebody shows up with an actual need and that they have a right not to be excluded and they have a right to be protected, right? And we tend to be seen in extremes. It's a tragic thing. And yes, disability is a tragic thing when it happens. I had a tragic experience when I was 18 years old and I fell out of that tree. But I haven't had a tragic life. And I'm not a tragic person because of it. It was an event that happened 45 years ago that I responded to, that I adapted to. So it's a mistake to see people with disability in tragic terms. And of course, because we think disability is so tragic and it's so difficult and so horrible, well, anybody who succeeds, anybody who adapts, anybody who's happy, anybody who feels okay about themselves, wow, how amazing, how inspirational. But what's this really about? It's just about people doing what we gotta do. If I didn't adapt, if I didn't use a wheelchair, if I didn't fight for access and all the things that I do, I wouldn't have a life. I wasn't willing to sit home and not have a life. So what we got to do. It's not as big a deal. I know that's not a very inspirational line, but the fact is, it's not as big a deal as people think it is. It's much more about making sure that people get what they need, that they get the rehab, they get the tools, they get the resources, they get the setting where they can function, and they are thought of and planned for in emergency planning, right? It's all part and parcel of the same thing. I have this concept called disability mind, because the world sees through disability through its non-disability mind, but it needs to be understood through the experience of having a disability. My particular version, and there are, deaf mind, blind mind, amputation mind, little person mind, you name it, take your pick. But my version is walking mind, wheeling mind. Now, I know people who walk, see me using a wheelchair, and the completely natural, understandable response to that is, I wouldn't want to have to be in a wheelchair. I don't want to lose the ability to walk. Well, of course you don't want to lose the ability to walk. So naturally, the wheelchair seems limiting to you. It seems like a prison to you. And what's the language? Confined to a wheelchair. Wheelchair bound. That is a walking perspective. But when you can't walk, it all changes. I need the wheelchair. It's the source of my mobility. It makes my life possible. I treasure it. What I care about is having the right one. And man, wheelchair technology has come a long way. Remember that picture of me in the old Everest and Jennings folding thing that weighed 60 pounds? And now I'm down to, I think, 25 for this chair. And it's a lot more comfortable. It's easier to push. It takes less of my energy. It puts less strain on my shoulders. It protects me from skin breakdown because of the way it's configured. It's custom built. I could go on and on about wheelchairs. So I don't feel confined to my wheelchair. I am liberated by my wheelchair. That is the disability mind. That's an example. And any of you who want to understand people living with a disability need to take a little time to sort of get inside, well, what's their point of view? What's that really like for them? Because all of us, our essential nature is to find a way to adapt, to find a way to move toward what's possible in our lives, and most of all, to feel okay about ourselves as we are. That's what people with disabilities do. Right? So it turns out that the models that actually fit more accurately are people with disabilities are extremely highly adaptable people. That's what they do. That's how they live. They're very creative problem solvers. Again, it's a lifestyle. It's what we have to do to get out there and all kinds of obstacles and barriers that we face. So we don't just say, oh my gosh, I have a disability, I can't do it. We go, no, I'm going to fix that. I'm going to do something about that. Right? And I'm going to do it by being an effective advocate. I'm going to get out there and I'm going to make my case. I'm going to learn how to interact with the powers that be and speak truth to power and work the system and get this world so that people can live the lives they deserve. And because of this, people with disabilities are emerging into the modern world. Now, 10:15, right? Yep. Okay. Let me emphasize this. There's a scale. There absolutely are people with disabilities that are very medically significant. They have significant pain. They have significant medical issues. They require people to be on hand. They require treatment. They require absolutely very significant assistance and presence by other people. That's one end of the scale. The other end of the scale are, not to set myself up as such a perfect model, but somebody like me. I'm entirely independent. I work, I travel, I shop, I have friends. You know, I do all that. I bake bread, I play backgammon, I have the best Labrador retriever in the world, on and on and on. I'm just living my life, but I wheel, I don't walk. So there is this scale, and the world has changed in a way where the portion of the scale of people who are able to be increasingly independent and active is growing, is getting larger and larger. I'll go into more details about it in a moment. But we are now emerging into society on a scale in terms of being active, and that's why a focus on independence and inclusion is more and more critical than it's ever been before. And when we're talking about emergency planning, we're not just talking about helping people who need help. We're talking about, like we are with everybody else, we're turning folks into the economy. People being able to get back to work, people being able to run their businesses, people being able to spend their money to maintain our cities and our states. And that's a big part of what emergency management is about, is preserving the economic vibrancy of the areas where disaster happened. People with disabilities are real players in that part of the process as well. Let me introduce you to Dmitry Konevsky. Becca, do you know Dmitry Konevsky? Do you know about him? No? Dmitry Konevsky was born in Soviet Russia, born deaf, and so never learned to verbalize. And when he was very young, okay, now she knows. When he was very young, his parents realized that he was really good at math. In fact, it turned out Dmitry Konevsky was a genius, a true prodigy. But in the Soviet Union, they didn't really let people with disabilities go to college. But fortunately, his father was an official somewhere with whatever, got him into the Russian Polytechnic Institute, and Dmitry Konevsky eventually made his way to the US and was hired by IBM. And IBM said, what are you going to do with this guy? We have a deaf, nonverbal, genius mathematician here. We ought to be able to do something with him. So what did Dmitry Konevsky do? He developed the initial algorithms for speech recognition, for speech to text, for text to speech, because he wanted to be able to communicate with people. He wanted the deaf population to be able to communicate with people. Funny thing, hello Siri. We all use it now. Dmitry Konevsky, a deaf man doing work driven by disability, ended up producing a technology that all of us are using and that's changed the world. Do you see the overlap? Do you see the connection? It's not just disability and everybody else. And just think of the billions of dollars in royalties that IBM has been earning from patents. This is big business. I heard a really great deaf joke. Can I have one of the interpreters, one of the ASL interpreters, come up here for a second? I've been wanting to share this with Becca for a while. Hi, Becca. I'm Gary. I don't know, maybe you've heard this joke or not, but isn't that great? Incredible. What? Don't you guys? There we go. What? Didn't you guys get the joke? Didn't you? Oh, I'm sorry. You don't sign, do you? Well, who's disabled now? Get it? Disability is contextual. Whether a disability disables depends on the setting, depends on the conditions. So I learned this when I went back to school after my injury. This is the School of Architecture at Lawrence Tech in Southfield, Michigan. Notice all the steps up there? There was no level entrance, no way for me to get in and out of the building. I was carried up and down steps for 5 years to study architecture. Note the irony? Thank you. So there are two important pieces about this. One is that we adapted. I wasn't not going to go to school, so I started asking people to carry me up and down the steps. I gave them a little training, and you go through college with a lot of the same people, and they all knew the drill, and after a while, it became kind of normalized. It's just, we just kept talking about whatever while they carried me up and down the stairs. But my independence is really important to me. I was still set apart from everybody else, not being able to come and go on my own. I wasn't okay with that. So I started campaigning to the campus administration. I started writing in the school paper. I started talking to people about it. I got local news to do a couple stories about this, and the process took 5 years until finally, here it is, my ramp at the Lawrence Tech School of Architecture in Southfield. Huge roar of applause from the crowd. Thank you. Damn, I call them every month. When are they going to put that damn gold plaque up there with my name on it? Jeez. Funny thing is, it's like 40 years later, I'm sure that nobody there has any idea about the story behind this ramp. But the story continues because they have expanded the campus post-1990. All construction now falls under the ADA. And now this campus is completely accessible. I was one of a generation in that window of time where there was still a process going on of people getting why this mattered. The chairman of the college said to me, okay, we'll consider doing this, but I have to ask you, do you plan on staying and completing your degree? He made a core mistake. He was thinking that I was asking them to do it for me. Well, I was, but the reason that he needed to do it wasn't just for me. He needed to understand that I represented a cohort of potential students that were still yet to come who required accessibility, and that his university needed to be able to serve them. So things have changed, and I got to be part of that little world where we had to fight for access and get this kind of stuff done. Okay, let's learn some more about the emergency management world. Now, Ray, I'm not going to need you to answer this one because every emergency management professional in the world is going to know what this is. Come on, somebody, say it. National Incident Management System. All of us get trained in NIMS. Everybody, who's been to Anniston or Emmitsburg? Yeah, show of hands. Okay, well, not as many as I expected, but we all go to the Center for Disaster Preparedness or the Emergency Management Institute in Emmitsburg, Maryland, or locally there are NIMS trainings. This is part of this world and this life. The National Incident Management System is an amazing, I think, brilliant system, which is designed with a pre-established structure so that when a disaster happens, things essentially get, I'm being simplistic, but essentially get plugged into it, and that produces the response and the recovery process. Part of NIMS is ICS, Incident Command System, thank you, because you gotta know who's in charge, and you need to have shared language. So there were problems that were happening before this stuff existed where fire and police and EM departments and so on were using language that meant different things to each other. So NIMS and ICS is this system that when a response happens, it's not just, oh, send out the first responders. There needs to be an organization. There needs to be a command structure. When you deploy a force, there has to be human resources. There has to be a public information officer and external affairs. There have to be legal people, finance and contract people, logistics people, planning people that gather information and put it together and put information out about situational awareness to everybody else, and on and on and on and on. It's a very, very substantial organization that has to get put in place in order to respond to a disaster. And it has a few really remarkable features. Number one, it's designed to address all hazards. So there's not an earthquake or a power outage or a hurricane or a terrorist attack version. NIMS and ICS is designed to address any and all hazards and at any scale. So NIMS and ICS gets used locally if there is, like when the Super Bowl happened, there were ICS features of the EM's world support of the Super Bowl. Am I right? Yes? Yes, thank you. Yes, yes. And then, like Ray and I have experienced, just 60 disability integration advisors alone just in North Carolina. I think in Baton Rouge, the FEMA force was something like 4,500 people. So it is a very significant organization, and it is driven by these structures, these pre-designed structures, NIMS and ICS. And it's also driven by the concept of whole community. And this is what brings us back to DAFN. When you think of whole community, that includes people with disabilities and other access and functional needs. Okay, time's getting tight. There's a lot to say. All right, so lesson 2 on the disability world. The world has changed. More people with disabilities are surviving, partly thanks to medical changes. More people with disabilities. We live in an increasingly accessible world. I don't have to get carried up and down steps very often anymore. I don't have to go in back doors. The curb cuts are there. I'll still show off and pop my wheelies and jump curbs, but I don't have to as much as I used to. I have parking spots. When I left home in the 70s, I had to assume that I wasn't going to be able to find a bathroom. So I had to limit my drinking. I had to be very careful about what I did. Mobility has increased, not just manual wheelchairs, but power wheelchair technology has made it possible for people who couldn't be as mobile, who couldn't put in full days to function at a high level, which includes getting an education. Education is universally accessible. More people with disabilities are getting higher educations, and so therefore more career-oriented. People are empowered by technology, as we saw with Dmitry Konevsky, and also work is less about physical labor and more about information, and almost anybody with a cognitive ability, in fact, anybody with a cognitive ability can drive a computer these days. And we have gained civil rights protections. Protection from being discriminated against based on disability, from being excluded based on disability, and that certainly falls on the emergency management world. Section 504 of the Rehab Act, anybody who gets a penny of federal money is required not to discriminate against persons with disabilities. And that goes back to 1970 1997, I think, is when they actually signed the regulations. But that's a story we don't have time for. Though I would refer you, if you can remember this, go to YouTube and watch The Power of 504. It's a video that tells the whole story of people with disabilities occupying a federal building in San Francisco to make this happen. But all of this came about because of this guy. This is Ed Roberts. Ed was quadriplegic from post-polio. He graduated high school in the 60s. He wanted to study political science at UC Berkeley. The college president famously said, "We tried cripples once and it didn't work." The California Department of Vocational Rehab said, "We're not going to pay your tuition because you'll never work." Well, Ed and his family took the state of California and the university to court and won. While Ed was at UC Berkeley in the 60s, remember what was going on and what he learned about organizing and about militancy, they formed an organization of people with disabilities and started providing services. People needed classrooms changed, they needed note takers, they needed personal assistants, they needed housing solutions, they needed transportation solutions, they needed communication solutions like ASL interpreters. These guys started making education accessible to people with disabilities at UC Berkeley. But then they realized that this extended out into the general public. So Ed Roberts and another very famous disability advocate named Judy Heumann, Ed has since passed away, Judy is still with us. They founded the first Center for Independent Living in Berkeley, California. And they went and they got federal legislation to contribute money to the process and to say that any CIL, C-I-L, Center for Independent Living, sometimes Independent Living Center, ILC, see, they're into acronyms too, not just the EM world, must be run by 51% people with disabilities. Our CIL here in Phoenix is Ability 360. Phil, are you in the room? I haven't seen you yet. I thought Phil was going to be here. Well, look what people with disabilities have done. They built one of two, I hear there's a third one under construction, full athletic facilities that are designed from scratch for accessibility, as well as another building which houses Ability 360 and a variety of other organizations such as the Arizona Spinal Cord Injury Association. This is a beautiful campus built by people with disabilities. So what do you think now about the idea that people need to be taken care of, that people are limited, that people are unable, that people need to be helped? Look at the substantial capabilities that people demonstrate by creating this kind of stuff. And really, if you haven't been over there, go give a visit. They'll give you a tour, and you will see. And what this means, oh, by the way, I also want to maybe go see some quad rugby over there, talk about serious take no prisoners athletics. This is really serious stuff. So what it means is that people with disabilities represent very capable, very substantial, very hardworking, very talented, very smart, very insightful, very creative working partners. So, by the way, no one's to blame for the fact that these social stereotypes are still entrenched. Nobody's to blame for the fact that we're still early in this process of bringing DAFN fully into the emergency management world. I want to be really clear. I hope you're not getting that I'm saying, oh, the EM world's really got to get its act together. They don't care enough. Absolutely not. This is just an arc that we're on. This is a process that we're in together. The fact that you are all here, that we're here together, is proof that we get this and that we're moving the process along. And now you're understanding better, hopefully, how much the disability community has to bring to the emergency management world, and the disability community world understanding better what emergency management is about, how it works, and how they can best participate in the process together. That's really what this is about. So we have a lot of work to do. And I have a few things in mind for what I think are on our agenda. Disability needs to be integrated into the process. That's why FEMA calls it disability integration, because it's about bringing all the other program areas up to speed. I got 4 minutes, I'm gonna make it. Wow, incredible. But there's a tendency, I've seen a number of emergency plans, and I've seen specific situations where disability was thought of later. We're going to do everything else. Now we'll deal with the people with disabilities and what they need. It's a huge mistake, because some of those situations, if it had been planned for in advance, then something would have happened that couldn't possibly happen after the fact. If you build a building wrong, you can't go back and then make it accessible, for instance. So disability needs to be infused throughout our emergency plans, every step of the way, not as an add-on, as an annex at the end. This is commonly what happens, the DAFN, I just used the word annex. For instance, anytime there's mention of communication, there needs to be mention of ASL interpretation. There needs to be mention of alternative formats. There needs to be mention of people with lower literacy and simple language. Every single time it's mentioned. The word accessible often is enough to be put in hundreds of places in an emergency, to keep it top of mind all the time, and that it is a continuing part of it, not something that we do after the fact because it's a compliance requirement. Disability integration, high priority for us. And to really fully partner, to include people with disabilities in that planning, training, exercise, assessment, repeat, shampoo, conditioner process. Oh, thank you. Somebody actually laughed at that. There's no way that there are enough disability partners to actually work with everybody who has a plan. Because every city, every county, the state, every hospital, nursing homes, every university, large corporations, they all have emergency plans. There aren't enough of us to go around to actually work directly on every single plan. So one of my ideas is, well, then let's develop some boilerplate content. Let's create a working group somehow together where we can create text for common issues that appear in emergency plans, and let's start to make that available to everybody. And then we can do some fine-tuning with it. But maybe this is an idea that could help move this process along. And how are we going to hire people with disabilities and access to functional needs? How are we going to do things like a generator program to provide them for people who are ventilator dependent if the state isn't committing enough money? Let's lobby to get the money from whatever the source is to invest more in DAFN for emergencies. Or even grant programs in order to do some specific program, like to be able to fund preparedness events for people with disabilities, to help the independent living centers, disability associations, any of the disability partners. They don't have a lot of money to throw around. So maybe we can pursue some grant programs to help prepare those populations that everybody is responsible for. I just mentioned generators, people. I mentioned this earlier as well. People need urological supplies, they need equipment, they need ventilator supplies and so on. Maybe we can create a stockpile someplace so that we can tap into it when people have the need. Maybe we can design a template for a preparedness training event for persons with disabilities so everybody doesn't have to invent the wheel on their own every time. Let's create a program. Let's create an event that everybody gets to put on much more easily because we've worked out the details. And most of all, we got to keep learning about each other because there is so much more to learn about each other. And we should bring this woman into the process. Who knows who this is? That's Roxy. This is Roxanne Brawley-Cofford. She is the Region 9. We are part of Region 9 here in Arizona. The offices are based in Oakland. She is the Regional Disability Integration Specialist. Roxy is so great. She is so passionate about this. She knows her stuff so well, and she's incredibly cool and wonderful. And she's there to work with all of us. She is available to us as a resource. She conducts roundtable events, so we want to get her down here and let her contribute to the process. Because what we do here is going to make a real difference. And one of the things that I discovered about my disability experience and the emergency management experience is that I found that I could do things that I never thought I would be able to. I surprised myself over and over. And another experience I had in life where I surprised myself was learning how to juggle. This was something I never thought that I would be able to do. But it turned out that it was the lights are not helpful at all. Thank you. Oh, it's gone. See? Don't applause failure, please. Okay, I can't do all the fancy stuff. Oh, wow, I actually pulled it off. Thank you. Okay. Ta-da! Thank you. It was about learning. It was about refusing to accept that I couldn't do it. It was about reaching out to expertise and support to help guide me, to help show me the way, and it was about just sticking to it and doing the work. And that's exactly the position that we're in. I appreciate all of you so much for being here. I appreciate all of you so much for the work that we're going to do together. I'm committed to being your partner in any way that I possibly can because we will make a difference and we will save lives. Thank you.